President Obama wrapping up a press conference that sort of spanned ISIS, the war on ISIS, the campaign trail, and $40 million cash payout to Iran, discussing all those topics and more. And joining me now to break down the press conference, James Carafano from the Heritage Foundation, Vice President and Senior, as well as Senior Political Editor, Steve Chaggaris, who joins me from D.C. Okay, I want to start with you, James. We were talking about the war on ISIS there. The president announcing this week that what Pentagon did, that they were attacking the town of Sirte in Libya, using airstrikes to go after that town. Is the president, I didn't see any new ideas or any new strategy that he articulated today, but he did say he never leaves a briefing without trying to ask, is there something we haven't thought of to do here? Do you think that the tactic in any way is changing on how they approach ISIS?
Well, we ought to distinguish ISIS in Syria from ISIS in Iraq. I mean, I think the president's actually kind of pessimistic assessment on ISIS in Syria is pretty accurate. How you get to a resolution of that conflict is very, very difficult. Nobody's going to go in there and clean all that mess out. And as long as Iran and Russia are supporting Assad, Assad's never going to leave. So, and as the president stated, the Russians have a vested interest in that. It's keeping Assad in power. It's not bringing violence to an end and ending the refugee crisis. So that's a big problem. I think his assessment of Iraq was accurate, but I think folks should listen to that. He says, you know, this may not end on our watch. That's true. And then he said, and it's not the end of the problem, and that's true. And that is actually one area where I would have loved to have heard more from the president, and where I'd love to see a more forward-leaning strategy. And one of the concerns that a lot of experts have is what's actually the only thing holding Iraq together right now is the fact that they're all fighting ISIS. And when ISIS, when the black flag comes down in Mosul, will they continue as a country, or will that devolve into a civil war? That would be a big problem, because that would just leave a space for ISIS to jump back. And the other thing is, I think both al-Qaeda and ISIS, if you look at their what they've been doing lately, is both of them essentially are looking beyond the geographic caliphate. I mean, ISIS is already kind of sending signals that, hey, we may lose the proud flag that we put up there. And so they're already looking at how do they sustain their global presence beyond that. So I think there's a real question of how you deal with that. And interestingly, what was not discussed really at all, just one brief mention of al-Qaeda, was there was absolutely no discussion of al-Qaeda. And again, a lot of experts argue al-Qaeda has come back in a significant way. It actually has a global presence, and it's actually been very stealthy about it. It's not following the ISIS path of kind of standing up a flag and saying a target and come after me. Instead, what it's doing is it's collecting alliances, and in some cases not having people openly declare that they're part of al-Qaeda, and kind of focusing on local issues, or some people call it a local jihad, but again, trying to keep the global Islamist insurgency alive. So those are a lot of big issues that are really going to be left to the next president.
And Steve, we heard him say that he believes the homeland is significantly more safer because of the strategies he's put in place. Very important, because people are concerned about terrorism as much as they are as the economy. How do you think this is going to factor in, especially for Hillary Clinton?
Well, we'll see. It's interesting because in terms of the polling that we've seen up until really this week, Americans seem to think that Donald Trump would handle ISIS better than Hillary Clinton. And so, you know, you're going to have the president out there repeating his idea that, look, you know, what we've done all we can do. We're working as hard as we can. We're fighting these guys as hard as we can. But, you know, the threat still exists. And so he's really going to be trying to help Hillary Clinton make the argument that continuing with the strategy they have right now is the way to go, and not to put this in the hands of a risky Donald Trump. That's going to be their argument moving forward.
What'd you make of, Steve, of the fact that he said that it was ridiculous, that alluding to Donald Trump's comments that the elections would be rigged?
Yeah, it was an interesting question. It was an interesting response. I thought the president was sort of laying out, like you said, he called it ridiculous. He said it didn't make any sense to him. He said, you know, maybe if on election day Donald Trump's up by 10 or 15 points in the polls and he loses, then he might have a point. But he also added that he's never seen somebody complain about cheating before the game is over. I do have a minor quibble with that, because if you remember Deflategate, the Colts did complain about cheating at halftime in that game. But generally, the point is well made. Whereas, he's saying, how can you call an election rigged 3 months before the election is actually happening?
Mm-hmm. It was also interesting, I found, James, the comments about Vladimir Putin. There was a lot of tough talk against President Obama about the fact that it looked like he was somehow siding with Russia, trying to create some sort of a deal in dealing with Syria. And people were a lot of folks were kind of critical about his take on that. And he came out saying that, I don't believe you can necessarily trust Vladimir Putin. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's just a statement of reality. It's kind of what you wish we'd heard this 7 years ago. I mean, the president's repeatedly tried to kind of play fair with the Russians, whether it was Putin or his predecessor, and we had the Russian reset. None of that's worked. So the Russians have a consistent pattern of not being reliable. We saw what they did in Ukraine and the massive threat of destabilization in Western Europe that's caused. So, for the president to say, well, I'm skeptical of the Russians, well, we're kind of all glad to hear that. Part of the reason for that is he's got 7 years of getting burned by the Russians.
Mm-hmm. Certainly true. And the fact, Steve, also, he talked about the $400 million cash payout to Iran that's been getting a lot of attention over the past couple of days. And the president coming out forcefully saying, we told you guys back in January that we were doing this payment and that we had 3 tracks pretty much going. We had the nuclear track, we had a prisoner swap track, and we were dealing with these frozen assets, by the way, which were back from 1979 that we needed to deal with. It was the first time that we're openly talking with Iran. Do you think the public will buy that?
Well, the public may buy it. Republicans aren't going to buy it, and they're going to continue to talk about the idea that this was cash that was transferred in the middle of the night and it was transferred in unmarked bills. And you're already hearing people on Capitol Hill. You're hearing the chairman of the House Foreign Relations Committee say, I want to have hearings on this and ask questions about this. So there's no way that what Obama said today is going to quiet his critics on Capitol Hill, meaning that this is going to be an issue that he's going to have to deal with. And Hillary Clinton, frankly, is going to have to answer for over the next few months. The Republicans are definitely going to make this an issue.
Yeah, a lot of people wondering about it. And it is true, he definitely did. And he also made the point, James, of saying, our biggest critic on this Iran deal, the nuclear deal I'm referring to, was Israel. And the Israeli military and the intelligence establishment all agree that the deal is going as planned, that this is exactly how we expected. Do you think that Israeli intel military folks would have that same assessment?
Well, I think generally across the board, I think that's one aspect of the speech that a lot of people might find a bit disingenuous. I think there are a lot of concerns remain about the Iran deal. I talked to a lot of folks in the Middle East. A lot of our analysts have been there, and the concern about Iran potentially getting a nuclear weapon still seems very, very, very strong. Not addressed, for example, is the Iranian ballistic missile program, which is continuing to move forward very aggressively. And that's part of the nuclear threat. The other element is no discussion really of Iranian behavior. They still support Hamas. They still support Hezbollah. A lot of people still arguing their influence in the region is destabilizing. And I think, perhaps something in the president's remark that you actually might say disingenuous is, well, we were taking away the ability of Iran to go nuclear right away. And then you would say, well, wait a second. The U.S. government never had any intelligence that said Iran was planning on pulling a nuclear trigger right away. So the argument that somehow the deal stopped the Iranians from doing that, when there's actually no evidence the Iranians were actually planning on immediately going nuclear, the president essentially is taking credit for something that never happened. And like I said, I think the president may think the deal is going fine or say that in the press conference, but I think a lot of experts and analysis are still deeply concerned about the Iranian nuclear program and Iran's foreign policy. So I'm not sure that's going to actually, calm the waters very much.
And Steve, we know that the presidential candidates will now be able to receive national security briefings. And President Obama was asked about whether Donald Trump should be getting those national security briefings. And he said that they're going to stick with tradition, as has been the case in election after election. Were you surprised by the way he reacted to that?
No, it's really hard for him to sort of weigh into that in terms of a political sense. He basically said, they're doing this because, they possibly could be the president of the United States, and you don't want to start from day one without knowing what is going on in terms of national security. But at the same time, he said, they're briefed and they're told specifically this is classified information, and they should be presidential and they should start acting presidential. It was sort of a swipe at Trump, but not really. He sort of waded out of politics on that answer, I think.
Okay, Steve Chaggaris and James Carafano, thank you both for joining us.
Thanks. Thank you.